Coming at you from the frozen tundra that is East Central Alberta, Canada, streaming live on YouTube, Facebook, Float, Odyssey, Telegram, Twitch, TikTok, and the Prepper Broadcast Network. Welcome back to the workshop where we create community, find freedom, promote preparedness, and share success. I am Toolman Tim, and today is December the 8th, 2022, and this is episode 216 of the Workshop Podcast. And this is a very rare pre-recorded Thursday episode. This evening, I am going to be a guest on the Last American podcast with Aiden Tate on the Prepper Broadcast Network. Just so happens that he records the same time that I do, and I really wanted to be on his show, so I moved things around. I hope you enjoy it. We're going to talk about wood-fired heat and that sort of thing in a few minutes. Let's get the announcements out of the way. First, the Telegram group. We just had an incredible night last night. We had a workshop watch party with National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation. It was a ton of fun. A little bit of bourbon was drank. We had a lot of laughs. We liked it so much we decided we're going to do it next month. Haven't 100% decided yet. We'll talk about that later. But if you want to be part of that, the easiest way is to grab the link from the description below and come and join the Telegram group and become part of the workshop community. It's free and it's a great place to hang out and learn and share your knowledge. Next, I know Christmas is coming quick, but guys, thank you so much for all the support that you've given me in the Patch of the Month Club. It went from just a passing idea to an obsession to now an on business adventure. So if you're looking for a way to support what I do, but you want to get something that's worth about $10 a month and pay $10 a month, go by patchofthemonth.co and subscribe. $100 a year, $10 a month, and you get a cool little Velcro morale patch every single month. Always something for my sick and twisted mind that, either something I came up with or something that the workshop community came up with in a live stream. So you'll enjoy it. And finally, guys, don't forget our very first and original sponsor, my brother Joel from the Fortress K9 and the Protection Dog podcast. That man can inspire a potato. It's unreal. Take a minute, go by, check him out, follow the Protection Dog podcast, number one, because Joel just is always spitting straight fire. Go by and check him out on Instagram, check him out on TikTok. He's always sitting down in the evenings, recording up his thoughts, just saying, hey, what's wrong with you? Get off your ass and go do something. And he's right. And he knows what he's talking about because he has built a successful business twice after once having it snatched out from under him. And like a phoenix, rose from the ashes and rebuilt it even better. The man is living the dream and doing exactly what he wants to do. So show him some workshop love and go by and check him out. And finally, guys, is today's tool. This week, if you follow my review videos, you saw I did a top 5. What it was top 5 Amazon affiliate sales this year, the items that sold the most, and one that every time I mention it, people are like, oh, I got to get it. And it's the Easy Does It can opener, made in the U.S.A., lifetime warranty. The thing's built like a tank, and it's not that expensive. You can pick it up on Amazon. It's good enough to have one for your bunker and one for the house. So check that out. The link is below. So with that, guys, I've got an episode for you that I recorded today in the car, in the truck, driving to and from properties I had to check on. And I decided, after listening to Nicole and John Willis and Tag talk about a whole bunch of things, but mainly cooking on a wood stove, I thought, hey, I got to do an episode on the joys of wood heat. So with that, guys, let's hop in and you can check out what I had to talk about today. Hey guys, Toolman Tim here with another Ramblings from the Road. I am on my way between Lloydminster and Wainwright, doing kind of a three-way triangle round trip today. Had to go up to Lloydminster to secure a bank property, which was fun because it was one of those places that has, it's a condo, so the locks are master locks, so I'm not allowed to just put any old lock on it. I have to get a special lock from the locksmith, and it always requires multiple trips, and one of those pain in the ass kind of jobs. The unit was empty, which was good. I ended up drilling too far in through the lock, which is bad, which wasn't the end of the world. It just meant that I couldn't reuse the trim piece and I had to buy a whole new lock instead of just a cylinder. I attempted, just so you know, I do not know why I suck so bad at lock picking. I have no idea what I do wrong. I brought my bump key set with me. It was a 5-pin slage, whatever, SC4, I forget. Yeah, anyway, standard slage lock. And I spent 15 minutes tapping on that. I just do not know what I'm doing wrong. So if anybody out there can offer me some pointers for lock picking, I really want to get good at this. But god damn, does it ever make me mad. So I tried and I tried and I tried, and it just didn't work. So I decided to go to the destructive method. I really wanted to be able to pick it because it probably would have saved me about $50, but I get reimbursed for it, but that's not the point. I really want to learn this skill, and for some reason, I don't know if it's these old meaty paws of mine that are just too big and too thick and don't want to put too much pressure on shit. I don't know, but I've had zero success. So I'm like 0 for 1,200 on my attempts for picking locks at this point in my life. I bought that kind of looks like a mini screwdriver vibrating lock that did nothing for me except piss me off and make me want to throw it. I've been practicing with these bump locks, which, guess what, has done nothing for me. I watch videos. I know the lock-picking lawyer makes everything look so easy, but I followed his steps to a T for lock bumping and just couldn't get it to work. So I don't know. Anybody out there wants to give me some tips and pointers, it'll be great. I'm going to keep working. I will not give up. I will get mad and I will pass off on lock picking for, a while. But then I will eventually figure it out. So there's that. I also have a lock picking kit that I got sent in the mail from some company that I'm going to keep working with until I can give it a proper review. I kind of figured that would be the way to force me into it. But yeah, so anyway, those are the joys of lock picking. But I got that secured. I dropped off keys for 3 more units, which means I now have 4 secured units in Lloydminster, which means the trips are starting to be worth going up there. So it's kind of cool. There have been a lot of condos getting repossessed up there, and I made a deal with them that I only have to go once a month because it's it's 2.5 hour round trip just the travel. Sorry, hour and a half each way, so 3 hour round trip. So normally I'm supposed to check on them twice a month, but these are going to be just once a month, and it works good. Pays for my gas. I get a bunch of shopping done, probably have a meal. So yeah, and eventually, and plus we get the bonus gravy money of the cleanups. Those are really good. The last one was a couple of grand because it was a drug den. It was horrible. So beyond that, last evening we had just an awesome time for those. I think we had 11 or 12 people on the workshop watch party for the Lampoon's Christmas Vacation. It was a ton of fun. A little bit of bourbon was drank. And yeah, it was just great. I think we're going to try to do a watch party once a month. We're shooting, I think, so I don't know. I don't know how we come up with this idea, but it would be kind of fun. We definitely know what our February movie is going to be. It's going to be Groundhog Day. Our January movie, we were talking about maybe Strange Days, which was the one I talked about in my Shit Hits the Fan 90s films. It takes place on December 31st. 1999. It's a real kind of dystopian style. It's weird. It's not the greatest movie in the world, but it would be a lot of fun. So I'm trying to come up with some other ways to do this. So you're going to find, obviously, it can't be on YouTube because it would get a content match, even though we're technically, I don't know. Anyway, it is what it is. So it can't be on YouTube. It can't be on Facebook. We did it on Telegram, and it wasn't bad, but the audio was kind of shitty. But what I found was, if everybody comes in and joins the stream directly into StreamYard, everybody had a much better experience. So we're going to try that for a while. Not really sure. I'm going to talk to Mr. and Mrs. there over at Liberty Late Night. They do a watch party, and I'm going to get some tips from them because it's one of those things that I want it to be a lot of fun. So we're going to probably do a giveaway. I'm probably going to do some trivia too. I like trivia. Always fun to do that. I don't know. We just had a blast quoting, Clark W. Griswold and Cousin Eddie last night. There's so much in that movie, and it just cracks me up. So that was a lot of fun. And I never meant to mention as I started here, the reason I'm recording this is I'm 95% sure that I'm supposed to be on Aiden Tate's podcast this evening. I haven't got confirmation yet, but I have to plan like I am. So that's going to be on Skype. We're going to be recording at the exact time I'm normally live. So instead of the podcast being live this evening, it's going to be Memorex. And if you're and if you're a millennial, you might be like, what the hell is that old feller talking about? Memorex. It's not live, but it's Memorex, yes. Kind of like same bat time, same bat channel. So by the looks of things, I won't be going live this evening. Now, if I end up going live, this episode will still go out, but there you go. Been having a really good time. I was listening on my way up. Whoops, two-wheel drive going around a corner. Nice, there we go. But yeah, so on my way up to Lloyd this morning, I was listening to, I think it was last week's Tuesday Live with John and Nicole, and they had Tag from Life Done Free, or I think I got that backwards, but anyway, you know what it is. Maybe that is it. Anyway, just Tag's such an awesome guy. I'm going to have him on the show. I've reached out to him, and I'm going to get him on specifically here before too long. But of course, you can't listen to John and Nicole and Tag in this instance and not be motivated and not, there was just so many things in that episode that I kind of wanted to touch on. But I think the highlight, well, there was two. So the first highlight was, of course, John Willis doing what John Willis does. And he said, if your ass is sitting on the couch too much and not getting shit done like you should, he says, take that goddamn couch and fire it out in the front yard. Because if you don't have a couch to sit on, your ass ain't going to be sitting on a couch. And I thought, man, if that isn't motivating. So there's that. I like that. But kind of today's topic, we'll see how far it goes, is going to be kind of off the top of my head. Obviously didn't put any notes on because this is ramblings from the road. But I was listening to Tag talk about how him and his wife do, the majority of their cooking on a wood cook stove. And years ago, when we owned our house down Digby Neck, it had a beautiful old, what they called Sweetheart wood oven. And so it had a firebox on the side. It had 4 circle burners on top that you could take the plates off of and set a kettle or a pot directly on the flame or on the metal if you wanted. And then it had a nice oven down underneath that you could open up and bake bread in it or whatever. And then it had a nice warming tray or warming kind of container up in the top there so you could proof your bread and that kind of stuff. I'd always had plans to possibly snake some flexible copper around the stovepipe and make a water jacket, that kind of stuff. But it made me think. I've been recently installing a wood stove in my garage. So it's been almost a decade since we had any form of wood heat. Well, hold on. Back up a little, Tim. That's not completely true. Because the first 2 houses we rented when we moved out to Alberta both had wood stoves in the basement. But I was so burnt out and tired from, the 12 cord of wood a winter, huge mess, not very efficient kind of wood burning that we did down Digby Neck where we lived, that I had swore wood off, and I said, I'll never have wood again. I knew I would, but that's just part of how sometimes when you do something for too long, it kind of turns you off to it, and then you're like, okay, time to turn around and try something a little different. So yeah, there's driving by a deer carcass that is being completely decimated by magpies. So there you go, if you can picture that. Roads are a little greasier here, going east to west to Wainwright. So 4-wheel drive on the highway. So yeah, we used to, and I enjoyed it. Now when we sold the house, obviously that old wood cook stove went with the house because, well, the thing weighed 2,000 pounds. I'm not really sure. The thing was heavy. And obviously we weren't bringing it to Alberta. That wasn't even an option. Now I did see one in an old garage on an old bank property that I secured. It wasn't in great shape. I didn't have the space. And sometimes I just have to tell myself, Tim, it's not worth it. No matter how much you'd love to take it and move it, it's just not worth it. But this wood stove that I now have that is almost completely rehabbed has been it's pretty cool actually. I've always wanted a wood stove with glass doors. This one had it. Everything has sealed up really nice. I'm going to do a video on redoing the gasket around the door. So if you've never seen that before, it's not hard. Something I've done many times in my life, but it's a lot of fun. So I'm setting up a wood stove in the corner of my workshop studio out in the garage. So I'm going to be able to have a wood fire going if I want. There's going to be a wood stove in the background of the studio, which will be kind of cool as well. And it gives us some redundancy. For quite a while, I had thought about having wood heat in our living room. But our living room it's big, it's long, but it's not very wide. So that's what it came down to, is space is a premium in our living room, especially kind of on the east-west walls. And yeah, so it wouldn't work. So the one wall I was thinking I'd love to put it on. Anyway, the trade-off was I decided I'm going to install one in the garage. So it gives me some fun, some practice, gives me an excuse to stockpile firewood again, and we will have a wood stove if and when we need a wood stove. We now have a completely insulated garage, so it holds the heat really well. So I thought we would talk about the different types of fuel today. So I'm going to spend the most time on wood, but I think I'll jump around afterwards and we'll discuss the pros and cons of all the different types of fuel. And as I'm doing this on the fly, on the wheels, I guess, I'm sure there'll be a few things that I overlook. And if I do, feel free to send them along to me and I'll do a follow-up one of these days. So the thing about wood heat is, when it comes down to it, it's the most self-sufficient form of heat that a human being or a family can have. But I want to venture to say that it also requires the most amount of sweat equity and work. Even if you buy your wood cut, split, and delivered to your dooryard, it still takes more work from that point on than any other heat source that you can deal with in a home. The next closest thing I can think of is coal, and you're probably thinking, holy crap, what is this, Ebenezer Scrooge times? But I would have thought so too, except when I moved to Alberta, my brother-in-law, the house his father and mother were living in at the time, still had a coal-fired furnace in the basement. Blew me away. I used to talk to the old-timers in Digby, where I grew up, and they used to tell stories about how there was a coal yard downtown, and the train would bring coal, and they would come and just dump it off in big piles, and you would go and fill it in buckets and truckloads and that sort of thing. And a lot of people in my hometown at one time did heat with coal, which was kind of cool. But as far as wood goes, for us, there was two different ways we did wood over the years. When we bought our first house out east, it was in a remote, way back in the country, mosquitoes pick you up and carry you away in the summertime kind of property called Doseville, and it was halfway to nowhere. But we had 20 acres of really beautiful hardwood. Now, a couple of things we learned that first winter, because we moved in and had no firewood prepared. So I did quite a bit of research, and if you have ash on your property, you can cut ash off the stump green and burn it in a fireplace. Now, does it burn perfect? Oh no. But it will give you heat. It won't give you as much heat as if it were seasoned, and you need to keep an eye on creosote in the chimney because you have wood that is literally sizzling itself to death in your fireplace. So those are two things to consider. But if in a pinch you need wood, that's the way to do it. Now, there may be other types of wood that you can burn green, but ash was the only one in my area that I was aware of. Now, it was kind of fun. The property behind us sloped up ever so slightly. I owned no tractor, no four-wheeler, no side-by-side, nothing like that the first winter we went in. So I borrowed my dad's snow shovel scoop, one of them old tin ones like a sheet metal, and I would go back and I would pile 6, maybe 8 sticks of firewood on it. Then I would put it kind of over my waist and walk down the hill with it and just kind of pull it behind me. It worked, and it was a slope right down into my basement, which was great, except in the spring when it rained and you would have a small flood. river going through the basement. So anyway, that was the way we stacked wood. We cut wood. It was fun. The next year we ended up getting a four-wheeler. I borrowed my uncle's tandem trailer and we were able to haul it all out in a couple of days. But we always had a hard, it was miserable. We had to put a ton of work into it. When you go back and cut your own wood, drop it from the tree, limb it, chunk it, haul it out, split it, stack it, burn it, clean the ash out of the furnace, haul the ash out, clean your chimney. You're talking a lot of work no matter how you slice it. So when we moved down to Digby Neck, we had, I don't even remember how many acres we had. It was 10 or 20 acres there as well. Beautiful land, more softwood, but there would have been plenty of space to burn. The problem is that all of our property was up over a cliff a long ways away. So it required a trip with a tractor or a four-wheeler or anything like that. So we just never get into going back there and cutting the firewood. So instead we would order a bunk load or two bunk loads. So you'd get one of those trucks that had two bunks on it. And they would bring me 12 to 16 cord of wood every year. Now, another thing some of you may know, some of you don't know, but if you buy a cord of wood in 16-foot lengths, you're going to get less wood in the end than if you bought a cord of wood in 8-foot lengths. And if you buy a cord of wood that's junked up but not split, you're going to get more wood than if you bought a cord in 8-foot lengths. And then if you bought a cord that's split, you're going to get more wood than if you bought a cord that was just junked. Because the bigger the wood, the less split the wood is, the longer the wood, the more empty space you end up having in the wood. So at the time, cut, split, and delivered, people in my area were paying about $200 a cord. But if I bought it at 16-foot lengths, so, long, twisted, so you can imagine how much wasted space was in there, we would end up paying about $80 a cord. But that still required me to cut everything, split everything, stack everything, let it dry, and then move it into the basement and repeat said process. Now, I cannot remember exactly my dad had a rule of thumb for how much cut, split, and stacked you would get compared to, say, 8 or 16-foot lengths that you'd get delivered. But I want to say it was about 2/3 perhaps. So if you had 16 cord, when it was cut, split, and delivered, I want to say it was closer to 10 to 12 cord that you'd actually have stacked. And that seems about right. One other thing I learned when we were living in Dossetville, each acre of hardwood, now this is just a rough estimate, but each acre of hardwood that you have will grow by roughly 3/4 of a cord a year. So if you burn 7.5 cord a year, you would need to have 10 acres of land. In theory, you could cut off that indefinitely without ever running out of wood. So that is by far, wood is the best renewable resource in my mind, because you're only burning stored carbon that was already stored in the trees anyway. It all balances out with wood compared to things like fossil fuels, or however you want to feel about it. But I loved wood. The problem with the house where we lived was it was not insulated barely at all. And it was a big old, 3-story, or you could call it a 4-story if you included the 8-foot basement we had. But even though it had a furnace that kicked heat out everywhere, by the time you got to the 3rd floor, the kids froze their tails off on the 3rd floor, let's put it that way. It reminded me of my buddy Jason's house that used to just have a wood stove in the middle of the living room. And by the time you'd wake up in the morning, there would be some serious frost on the inside of the upstairs bedroom windows. Whew, man, that was a bad pothole there, guys. So yeah, it worked, but it was not efficient, and it did not heat the house really well. We also had an oil furnace, which is basically diesel, that we could heat. It ran kind of off the same forced air system, but it had its own heating chamber and things like that. We never even turned it on the whole time we lived there, because unless, you wanted to literally burn money, there was no reason to do that. Our neighbors, the first year they moved into the property they lived in, they spent something like $4,000 or maybe $3,000 a month, or I can't remember. It was unreal, because they had an old insulated house with furnace oil, and furnace oil was not cheap at that time. So something to think about. But yeah, so wood was nice. It just requires constant attention. It's not like natural gas where you can turn it on and leave it and know, hey, I'm going to go for a week's vacation, and when I come back, the house will be as warm as it ever was. For us, 6 hours to keep the house warm, 8 hours, and you didn't have to start a fire from scratch. 10 hours, and you were rebuilding it, kindling and all, because even the coals would have been burned out by that point. So wood in and of itself definitely requires the most amount of work. But, again, if you have the land and you have a little bit of gear, you basically have, other than sweat equity, free heating for the rest of your life, which is not a bad thing at all. You also have lumber and trade goods and mulch and so many things that can come out of woodland like that. I got pretty good at baking bread in the wood stove at one time, but my favorite was just a good old stew in a pot, slow simmered all day long on top of the wood stove. To me, that was the best. And, a central air furnace. So for those who don't know, central air is when you have a furnace that has a blower behind it that is then the heat is pumped through ductwork into the entire house. That's become fairly common on the East Coast. Works the same as any forced air or central air furnace, that kind of thing. So forced air furnace pushes all that warm air around the house, which is cool. I enjoy that. Much more efficient. Now, growing up, my best friend Danny, they had a wood furnace in the basement. A wood stove in the basement. So that's your typical, black cast iron box that they would go down. And I think theirs held 16 or 18 inch sticks. And they would pack it as full could be. There's no ductwork. The only thing they had was like a 3-foot by 3-foot hole in their living room floor that had the jinkiest, scariest heat vent wide open that you walked across. The thing had no reinforcement to it at all. You walked on it and it felt like a suspension bridge. As kids, we were always paranoid to even walk across it, but it did something. It helped. They always left their basement door open as well. So that helped. And then his grandmother, for years until insurance told her she couldn't, had a wood cook stove in their kitchen. And until he moved out, until, he went away to college, she still cooked all the meals on a wood cook stove. It was unheard of. And eventually, as she got older and Danny moved out and, insurance kept getting on their case, they ended up getting a really neat little kerosene through the wall heater. So it supplemented the heat that was in the basement, and they could go buy kerosene at the local rental shop in 5-gallon buckets or get it delivered. And it was kind of similar to a heat pump, but it was a through the wall kind of kerosene thing. Then my aunt, Nancy, down at her house until they sold it, they had what they called a Keymax stove. Now it was a hybrid stove, and if you haven't heard of these are really neat as well. So it looked like your standard wood-fired kitchen stove. It looked like the old fancy, nice little kind of white porcelain, stainless steel, or cast iron tops, all of that. Really nice. Had a firebox on the side, but now these things are totally not legal anymore, but also going into that same firebox was a small oil furnace. So they had a 200-gallon oil tank outdoors, furnace oil, just like diesel, and it would pump itself through and it would burn in there. So it would heat just like wood would heat, except you were heating furnace oil instead. And it was a good trade-off because you could just turn it on and have semi-instant heat in the kitchen. But my uncle used it a lot as a way to start the wood fire. Anyway, eventually, I believe they had to turn the oil off, but we called them a Keymac stove. They were nice. And then in our area as well, quite often people would have what they called a wood chief stove. And those were very common in the 70s and 80s, and they typically were in living rooms. And they were a cast iron box that wasn't real fancy, but then they had around the outside kind of a brown metal, I don't know how to explain it, with grates on the top. Some of them would flip up. They made them with the chimney pipe going out the top or out the back. And if it went out the back, you could flip the whole top open and you had direct access to that cast iron. But they were a nice, slightly safer stove because you could lean against them and not necessarily burn yourself instantly. And they looked good. They had that 70s and 80s aesthetic, you know. But those were very common as well. But I always loved that Keymac. I remember in 2003, 2004, February 2004, we had White Juan. It was such a funny name. I was living in my own apartment at the time, and it was basically a hurricane in the middle of winter. And I've told the story many times, and we had huge drifts way up to the second-story balcony of downtown Ricardo's Pizza, up as far as the kind of decorative downtown street lighting, that kind of stuff. And we lost power for the better part of a day and a half, I think it was. And I remember going down to Aunt Nancy's and being able to get a hot cup of tea. I was a teetotaler, a tea drinker at that time, and it was just awesome being able to get a hot cup of tea when the power was out. And I went around, I remember, I took a hot cup of tea. I asked her, hey, do you have any extra candles? She had a bunch, so I took them and dropped them off to some people that I figured could use them. And that was, I really enjoyed that time. I always remember thinking, that was when I was like, I'd really like to get into emergency management. And then I realized, well, I think my passion's just to be prepared. But the great thing about wood, beyond all the work, is, especially if it's a wood stove, you can run it power on, power off. Doesn't matter at all. You can get one of those little, I forget what you call them. They're like a convection fan on top. And they have a little bit of circuitry in them that basically when it heats up, it activates. And then as the heat passes through it, the fan spins and pushes the air out. Those help a little bit. We tended to have a lot of them burn out and have them replaced at Home Hardware. So they were good, but they were less reliable than they could have been. Now, a wood furnace, of course, the biggest issue with them is they tend to have a much bigger firebox, which means you can, run them overnight and not worry about running out of heat per se. But the downside is if you have a central air, forced air wood furnace and you fill that son of a bitch right to the tits, full of hot, with wood, and you get a rip-roaring fire going, and all of a sudden the power goes out and you don't have your fan sucking fresh air in through, you can end up having a chimney fire or just a fire in general, because what ends up happening is all the heat just sits in there and just gets, supercharged, hotter and hotter and hotter. And what you have to do is the blower chamber above it, you have to take the panel off of that and allow air to circulate in, and that tends to be enough. As I remember years ago, the very, very first house Becky and I rented when we were first married was in Marshalltown, and it had a beautiful wood furnace. And our friend Rod was there from Ontario visiting for a few weeks, and him and Becky were cold, and so they decided to go to the basement and fill that wood furnace full. And she said it was so full that in order to get the wood in, the last stick of wood, they had to slide it in a bit, and then they had to kick it to force it into the firebox. And no sooner did they shut the door to the wood furnace than the power went out. And she called me all in a panic, because I always told her that if the power ever goes out on a wood furnace, that, I said she couldn't remember what it was. So I told her, take that front panel off and it'll help circulate it, and just keep an eye on it. And she said she could smell the dust burning off the plenum, but it was never that serious. And, so worst case scenario, if that doesn't cool it down enough, you can leave the door open to the furnace a bit. it'll burn a little hotter, but it'll burn faster and burn itself out quicker. Or in an emergency, I have thrown water on it to kind of hold back the heat a little bit on occasion. So there was that. So there's all kinds of fun things that I learned over the years from my dad. As far as cleaning out the chimney, in most cases, it's better to go to the roof and go down through with your chimney brush. So they tend to be these long, flexible fiberglass poles. And then if it's a clay chimney liner, it'll be a metal brush. And if it's a stainless steel liner, it's going to be an aggressive poly plastic brush. So you just kind of go up and down and make sure you wear a face mask, because otherwise you'll be blowing black snot for the next 4 days, because that's what Dad always used to do. Now you can check your chimney from the basement with a mirror, and you shine it up till you see daylight, and then pay attention to the sides. That can work. Something a lot of people don't know is those chimney brushes are flexible enough that you can actually clean your chimney from the basement. So you can go in on a 90-degree angle. Now, there's a few ways to do it, but typically you only want to put one bar on at a time, like one, what are they, 6-foot lengths. So put one on and your brush, force it in there, and then bend it up. You're not going to break it. Those things are made to be flexible. And then work your way up and down. It's going to be harder because you're going to be pushing up against the creosote instead of dislodging it and pushing it down. But it works. And so when you get to the top and as you pull it back down, all you really need to do is loosen the creosote. That's like the ash that sticks to the sides of your chimney liner. That's all. So if you're going to do it from the basement up, try to make sure that you do it more often so that you don't get it plugged up. But yeah, and there's another way too. I've seen people leave a permanent piece of rope, and I don't know exactly how they do that. I've never done it myself, but you leave yourself a permanent piece of rope down your chimney, and then you tie the brush off to the top, and you pull it up until you get close to the top of the chimney, then pull it back down and pull it up and pull it down. And there's ways to do that, but to me, I would be scared about that rope catching fire in your chimney. Now, most people say it doesn't, but I have seen it done. I'm not comfortable with doing it. Now, another thing for wood that we did quite often that saved a ton of money. Now, most people probably know the difference between hardwood and softwood, but those who don't, softwood tends to be, is it coniferous trees? Anyway, like evergreens. So like your pines and your spruces and your firs, that kind of stuff. The stuff that keeps its needles year round. Now, the thing about softwood is it burns fast, it burns hot, but it doesn't burn long. So if you want to start a fire, the best way to do it is small, skinny pieces of softwood in general, dry. Remember, everything has to be dry. Now, hardwood is your things like oak and maple and beech and birch and ash. That's the type of stuff that is your all-night fire. So what we would do is we'd put a couple of split pieces in there and then a couple of the biggest round pieces that we could fit. And you get a lot of big, thick, heavy coals from hardwood, whereas softwood tends to burn down more into an ash quicker. But it's a quick way to start a fire. So if you need some quick heat, start the fire with softwood, then switch over to hardwood to keep it going. And expect whatever, if you're starting from cold, that first set of wood is going to burn quick, and then after everything's heated up, it's going to take a lot longer for the next batch of wood to burn through. One other similar type of wood that hasn't, that I don't hear people talk about it quite as often, but quite a few years back, when I was working at Home Hardware, and firewood, there was a firewood shortage for some reason. The price had gone up immensely. The big thing was wood pellets. So if you haven't seen that, wood pellet stoves are pretty cool. They look just like your typical stove. They don't, I think you can get furnaces as well, and they're kind of neat. But so a wood pellet stove tends to sit in the living room. It tends to have a glass door so you can see it burn. What I like about wood pellet stoves is they have a hopper on them. So typically you can put a bag or a bag and a half in the hopper, fill them up, and then people can be happy and not have to worry about adding any combustible material to the fireplace for an entire day, or in some instances, a couple of days. So that's really nice. But the problem is you are dependent on the wood, the supplier who makes the pellets. So you are dependent on them for the price, you're dependent on them for the supply, and you are dependent or a slave to the up and down of the market itself. So again, you are, at that point, I don't think you're any better off than someone who burns propane or maybe natural gas, something like that. But they're good. I like them. They're nice. They're really good for old people. They're clean. You're not hauling wood in and out of the house. You're not dealing with brush and mildew and potato bugs and sawdust and dirt. All of it just comes in these nice clean bags. You put it over the hopper, you cut it, you dump it out, and that is that. So I need to take a break, guys. I'm going to go into the brick and pick up the washer and dryer for Becky's daycare. Pretty excited about that. I will be back. This is turning into a much longer episode than I expected. We have hit, holy cow, 36 minutes so far. I think we're only going to touch on wood heat for now. When I come back, if you remind me, I'm going to talk about slab wood and wood doctors and a few other things. So we'll be back. Hang in there. All right, and I am back on the road. This is take 2 of take 2. I started take 2 and then got a FaceTime from the missus. She had a surprise inspection with the health inspector at the daycare today. No big deal, just a few little renovation things that the electrician just finished up that they want taken care of. So, I always hate it when you run a daycare and you get those surprise inspections, but everything went well. So I am all done gallivanting around town. I picked up washer, a dryer, a big screen television. I filled up my gas tank, picked up supper for the kids, and I did 2 drive-bys. I don't know if I've ever filled you guys in on what a drive-by is or not. Well, we all know what some drive-bys are, but they're not quite that violent. This is where I'm given an address for a soon-to-be either repoed or abandoned bank property. And I take a drive-by once a month and look for signs of life. Looks like I got 2 moose coming up here. Nope, they're deer. Big deer. So this is the time of night. They're hot and horny and running around. 2 muley does there, yep. So yeah, so what I do is once a month I take and I drive by these properties to make sure they're still lived in. If they're lived in, that's all I do. Snap a couple of clandestine photos and call it a day. We look at things like, look for tire tracks in the driveway, in the snow. On days like today, it's easy because, people driving around town, they pick up kind of that muddy, gross stuff. And as they pull in and out of the driveway, they leave a nice brown track. Look for footprints in the snow. Look for, closed drapes, signs of people living there. And if they're still living there, then the property's fine. If they've abandoned it, then it needs to be secured so that it doesn't freeze up and blow up like that house, the ice house from a couple of years ago, which was really fun. So there's that. Anyway, so back to wood heat. I'm going to backtrack real quick. A couple of quick notes on pellet stoves. They require a little bit of electricity for the hopper. Just the hopper that automatically feeds the pellets that go through. So it doesn't take a lot. You could run it off of a 12-volt battery with an inverter pretty easily without any concern at all. Wouldn't take much solar to run the hopper in a pellet stove. Now, there's a few other things. People used to be concerned about what they thought was glue in wood pellets to hold the sawdust together. Not true. All they do is press the wood pellets under high pressure and the natural resins and sap come out and adhere the sawdust together. So that's really cool. They also have options for prairie grass pellets that you can buy, and some people can modify theirs to take corn, dried corn. So another reason to take corn out of the food stock, but in a pinch, if that's what you needed to do, why not? I kind of like that idea. And it would be interesting to look into making your own pellets somehow. I've heard about people trying. I don't know if it would be worth the hassle or not. And one other quick hack to go along with wood pellets. Traditionally, I mentioned before that hardwood in wood stoves burns longer. Maybe not quite as hot, but you get a lot more BTUs out of hardwood. Well, it's the opposite case in pellets. It tends to be softwood pellets tend to burn a little hotter, get a little better heat because they burn very quick anyway. But grab yourself some softwood pellets if you want some all organic, completely natural, throw it in the garbage. Kitty litter. Works great. So what we would do is we just let the cats go in there. You'd scoop out the hard stuff, and as they would pee in it, the pellets they hit would kind of clump down into a sawdust. You can kind of shake the pellets off to one side and then scoop out the clops of sawdust. So that was rather neat. Always enjoyed that. I thought it was cheap, really inexpensive, and it smelled great. Natural deodorizer. Next, slab wood. So if you guys have any sawmills near you, you can actually get a lot of pretty cool wood. There are a couple options there. Number one, most places I went to would offer for about $20, $25, you could fill the box of your half-ton truck with slab wood. If you don't know what that is, that's the sides of the log they cut off when they're squaring up the boards or the wood stock to make lumber out of it. So a lot of times, if you're handy and you pay attention to the stuff you're getting, you can get 3 or 4 feet of usable lumber out of that stuff as well. But it's softwood, it makes beautiful kindling, and in some instances, I've seen people online who heat their whole entire house with slab wood and save a ton of money. So check out your local sawmills. You don't want to get into rebuying slab wood from lumber yards and stuff, because anytime you add a middleman into things get really expensive. But we use slab wood a lot. We used to pick it up and it would get you through, the spring and fall times when you didn't need a great big heavy duty wood heat furnace going. You just needed a little bit of heat to get the chill out of the house and you'd be all set. And it's easy to deal with. It's easy to chop up. You don't even need a chainsaw. You can use a chop saw to chop it up into usable lengths. Build yourself a sawbuck. If you haven't seen what those are basically like a sawhorse, except they if you look at them from the ends, they look like X's, and you can build a stop into them so that you can just slide your slab wood in right to the length you want, chop it off, and keep going, and it can work really well. But slab wood is a great, inexpensive alternative. Now again, if it's a grid down or long-term power outage or something, you may not have access to it, but why not stock up on it now? Stack it up, stock it up, let it dry, and have it ready for you. Now from there, another type of stove that I didn't mention yet, we call them on the East Coast wood doctors, and what they are is an outdoor wood boiler or an outdoor wood furnace. They tend to work one of two ways: either a boiler that circulates hot water or water that gets heated, or forced air. Both ways, what you end up having tends to be kind of a large outdoor stove on stilts, so that it's up at like chest level, so it's easy for loading. They tend to take 6 to 8 foot lengths of wood. So it's the type of thing that you could fill up and it will burn for a day or two depending. And they're big, massive. They look like, like the furnace you picture, like what Kevin McAllister pictured in Home Alone, or something you'd see in Freddy Krueger, that kind of thing. But these things are massive. And then what they are is they have insulated ductwork that runs underground into the house, or they have insulated piping that circulates water, and it works like a boiler. So you can get your hot water out of it, and you can circulate it through like radiant heat or in-floor heat, that kind of thing. Now there's a ton of benefits to that. First, you don't need to cut your wood up nearly as long, so you can use 8-foot junk. It does not matter. You can burn anything in that. I know people who even burnt driftwood in that, which is totally not recommended in wood stoves, because the salt, the dry, salty wood tends to overheat and can cause fires and cause your fireboxes to warp and crack and that kind of stuff. But I knew people that would burn pallets. They would burn absolute anything for junk in there because it didn't matter. The cool thing was you could burn wet wood as well. Didn't matter. If you got a big blazing heat, you use it as an incinerator, burn your garbage in it as well, because it just has a little stack chimney in the end. You have no concerns about, a creosoted up chimney that you have to deal with in the house. Everything's outdoors. Now, the next thing, you don't have to stack your wood in your basement. You don't have to haul it in, haul it out. You can cut it up and junk it and leave it right where it is. All the mess stays outdoors. So you end up, all the bugs, all the debris, all the brush, the bark, the dirt, all of that stays outdoors. You never have any mess. You never have to worry about the smell of smoke in your home. The biggest downside to it is they're inefficient because they're outdoors in an uninsulated area, and your wood heat, whether it's through air or water, has to travel underground to the house. So you lose a little bit that way. But they are really cool. They weren't that expensive. I knew a guy on the East Coast that started a greenhouse business called Driftwood Greenhouses. And from what I understand now, he supplies all the cucumbers and tomatoes for wintertime for Sobeys in the Annapolis Valley. That's not anything small. That is a big process. And he heats both of his giant greenhouses with outdoor wood doctors. And he just brings in the wood. I don't know how many cord he burns. It's probably 40 or 50. But he brings that in. And yeah, there's traditionally not a lot of electricity involved. I think sometimes if it's forced air, they'll have a blower. Obviously, they'll have a blower that circulates and sucks the air in and out. But they're another really interesting way to make use of stuff that you wouldn't typically burn indoors. You know, you go by and pick up things like all the pallets at local at like hardware stores and stuff. Cut them in half once and throw them in there. You know, however you feel about it. I knew people that would burn their off-cut pressure-treated stuff. It just didn't matter. You know, you could put painted wood in there if you wanted to. Anything would burn, and it would heat your house. Now, there was a ton of upsides, and the downside was you're going to use a little more fuel, and you have to go outdoors to stoke up your furnace. But again, if you're using it to heat a house, you can go out there, and when you fill that up, you can be good for sometimes up to 48 hours without needing to fill it. So that gives you the ability to go away for a weekend. Whereas a furnace, I don't know anybody that could get more than 8 to 12 hours out of a furnace, even a modern, really efficient wood furnace. So all of that. Now, another thing, I don't know if you guys have heard of this tip before, maybe you have, but we used to use wood ash. Well, there's a couple of things. You can use wood ash in a pinch for fertilizer on things like rhubarb. Now, I know from what I understand, of course, wood ash is high acidic, so you don't want to put it on everything. But something like rhubarb just loves wood ash. And I'm not exactly sure why. Somebody out there can probably explain it, but I know from past experience it does. Another thing you can do with wood ash is you can make homemade lye for making homemade soap. It also works as a good drain cleaner, that kind of thing. So there's that option. And then the best one that I liked was it makes a really good traction for like salt or sand. So you can put it down on your driveway. Now, the two downsides to that is it does track some. It does work really well. And where it's black, it tends to absorb the heat of the sun a little better and tends to melt in a little bit. So that helps. But the other thing is, if you're going to use your ash from your furnace as traction, you want to make sure you're not burning any pallets or anything like that. Because that's a mistake I made a couple of times. I went and I'm like, oh, I'll put my ash out on the driveway. And then I realized, oh, Tim, you've been burning pallets. And guess what's in there? A whole bunch of twisted, rusty nails. So don't do that, because you're going to have a bad time if you do. And then finally, I think one of the best options, or one of the best attributes of wood heat, is just the sheer flexibility of it. So in a worst case scenario, you know, I remember Cinderella Man, the movie with Gladiator, you know, Russell Crowe. Really good film, and they were going through, I believe at the time it was the Great Depression. And people were breaking up their furniture, anything they could find to burn. And that's the thing about wood heat is, if you need to burn something, you can just walk out in the woods. I mean, I know, you can just, right? That word just, there it is again. But, I mean, things can burn. You know, if you use natural gas, propane, and those that go out, you don't have any other option. That's the only fuel you can burn in your furnace. But when it comes to a wood heated appliance or some sort of wood heat for your home, anything that you can burn can be potential heat. Now, some is more advisable than others, but there's so much you can scavenge, you know. Old farm buildings that are just sitting there in derelict, you can go pull them down and burn that stuff. You know, you can go by every lumber yard in town and you can pick up their pallets and their sticker boards. Those are the things that, you know, they put under pallets when they're, you know, moving lifts of lumber and plywood around. You can burn their little lath. That's those little strips that they put in like every third piece of lumber in the lumber lifts. There's so much. You can go to your local dump and pick up, if they'll allow you, go into their burn piles or their brush piles, anything. You can, in a worst case scenario, you can break up furniture and burn that. So there's always an option for heat with wood heat. It's flexible, it's low cost, it's renewable, but the downside, and it can be completely off-grid if it's only a wood stove, but the downside is the absolute amount of personal energy you have to put into it. And then if you want to make it easier, then you have to put mechanical energy into it, which then takes some sort of fuel. Whether it's fuel for your chainsaw, fuel for your wood splitter, gas to go pick it up, gas to have it hauled, whatever it happens to be. And there's usually distance involved. So that's the downside. But personally, I have a real soft spot for wood heat. I grew up, I remember going to visit my uncle, and we used to joke, but it would be the middle of January and he'd have his windows open because he'd have his wood stove or his wood furnace going, and the house would be in the high 80s or low 90s because he had it going that hot. But like he said, for the most part, and the reason he did it was it didn't cost any more to heat it to 90 than it did to heat it to 70, because you got to put the wood in, you got to burn it, and you had to be there to deal with it. And so he kept it hot, and if it was too hot, he would just open a window or open a door. And you don't have to worry about efficiencies nearly as much as you do when you're dealing with things like, electricity or natural gas, because every BTU you put out equals money out of your pocket. So there's that as well. But yeah, I just love it. I have so many memories. I remember as a kid going to my buddy Jason's house, and I remember tying my shoes up to leave his house, and I leaned down to tie them, and I pressed kind of the fleshy part just below your elbow, kind of on your forearm, right against that, cherry red stovepipe, and just kind of melted a good little scar there on my arm. It's from a bygone era. It's from a time from before, but it's still there, and the old-timey ways of doing things are definitely worth it. But here's the thing. If you're ever thinking about doing wood heat, don't wait. Don't be like, well, if the shit ever hits the fan, I'm going to go get me a wood stove and learn how to cook on wood and learn how to... No, that's never the time, guys. It's the same with everything. Do it now if you can, or experiment, or go to somebody's house and learn how to do it. But, work on your fire building skills. And the other thing about firewood, like I said, unless it's ash, it takes time to season. So you really need to, cut it in the late winter, early spring, and let it sit and air dry until fall, so then it's ready. So there's always that consideration as well. So I hope you enjoyed this kind of look at the joys of wood heating. I enjoyed it. It was something that, it was something that we let pass on for a couple of years because the sheer work of it kind of turned us off from it. And now, of course, I'm kind of nostalgic for it and kind of pining for the independence that it gives you. So there's that too. So yeah, share your wood stove stories with me, guys. Let me know, do you have some sort of wood heat in your home? Have you ever cooked on a wood stove? That kind of stuff, because I find that really enjoyable. So that's it for me today, guys. I hope you enjoyed this pre-recorded episode. I got confirmation while I was stopped that I am 100% going to be on The Last American this evening with Aiden Tate. Like I said, I believe his show is pre-recorded and it'll be out tomorrow or at some point, but I'm looking forward to it. Love to sit down and chat with him. He's authored a few books. I will get the link out to you guys as soon as I can. And as always, stay happy, stay healthy, and have a great week.